In the last video, I talked about the accusations of anti-Semitism and transphobia made against Gina Carano, who played in The Mandalorian before getting fired recently. I addressed those accusations, but I didn't address the laundry list of other accusations as to why people were saying she should be fired. And it's so many, and that I'm going to have to first read just a bunch of random tweets just so you can get the idea that people were indeed saying this. But then I'm going to have to itemize each thing. And there's so many that I really want to get it all done in one video, the part 2, because I already talked about 2 accusations already. But it's just so much that I may have to break this video up. So here's a bunch of tweets from that day, from February 10th, during the Fire Gina Carano, the re-stimulation of this hashtag Fire Gina Carano, Twitter hashtag. Someone says, "I'm not about to support a franchise whose star compares being a Republican to being a victim of the Holocaust. Sorry. Fire Gina Carano." Someone says, "That moment when a transphobic, anti-Semitic, police bootlicker, COVID denier, and Trump supporter plays a character who fought her whole life against oppression and tyranny. Lucasfilm should be ashamed. Fire her. Fire Gina Carano." And another person posted something in response to Disney condemning the January insurrection. This individual said, "Maybe you should fire Gina Carano, who supports the terrorists then. These words mean nothing when you are giving these people a platform at the same time. Hashtag fire Gina Carano." Someone says, "She's transphobic, anti-mask, alt-right, who parrots QAnon conspiracies, doesn't believe in systematic racism, and now shares anti-Semitic images. Fire Gina Carano." Someone says, "How many times do we have to say it before you do it, Disney? Fire Gina Carano." You can see this person shares a number of images, which we're going to get to as we go through each claim being made one by one. Another person says, "Your fans are all over the world and diverse. Star Wars is supposed to be a safe space for every fan. Now that we know a person like Gina Carano is against human rights, are you going to stay silent? I thought you said there's no place for racism. Fire Gina Carano." And you can see this person shared a number of posts as well, making her case that making their case that Gina should be fired. Again, we're going to get to all these social media posts. Another post, someone shared an excerpt from an article, and I'm not going to read this entire excerpt, but what I want you to take away from it is that they're claiming Gina is against Black Lives Matter and for Blue Lives Matter. Antoine Tabuena, he's posted this in July, but some articles were sharing it as to, how an example of why either Gina should be fired or just saying this is why she's controversial. And it addresses, it mentions Pizzagate, the Wayfair conspiracy, and just QAnon in general. We're going to get to those posts. And this is the Daily Beast article. This is the only article you'll notice that I'm actually going to give you an excerpt from. I just wanted to show you Twitter posts for the most part. But this article said she also encouraged people to follow her on the app Parler, which had been embraced by right-wing groups, and where many broadcast the siege on the Capitol in January. Over the summer, the actress also pushed QAnon, coronavirus, and Pizzagate conspiracies. Okay, so that's a lot of information, right? As far as all the reasons why people wanted Gina gone. And after I came across the fact that the claims of anti-Semitism and transphobia were, let's just say, highly exaggerated, to say the least. The anti-Semitism was just flat wrong, and then the transphobia, I mean, if you really squint your eyes, I guess you could interpret it as transphobic, but you're going to have to look at the other video, because I'm not revisiting that for an actual breakdown of that. But here's the accusations itemized, that based off those Twitter posts and based off the Daily Beast article, as well as maybe some others that I pulled from Twitter but failed to represent in tweets. So that she believes in voter fraud, that voter fraud occurred, that she, that she supported the January 6th riots. That's an accusation. Another accusation being that she encouraged folks to find her on Parler. Another accusation being that she's a COVID denier. Another is that she's anti-mask, and then that she's anti-vax, and then that she's anti-Black Lives Matter, that she doesn't believe in systematic racism, and others were saying she was a fascist, and then that she's a bootlicker, excuse me, which is someone that's just overly deferential to authority, like the police. Basically, usually the person that always finds a way to say the police were right. And then that she's a QAnon conspiracy theorist, and that she pushed the Pizzagate and Wayfair conspiracies. Now we're going to have to break down each of those, whether they're true. And I notice a lot of people just take, within this hashtag Fire Gina Carano movement, they just take it as gospel. If everybody's stringing all these adjectives together and saying this is her, and then maybe sharing a few things, a cluster of posts to make their case, well, I'm going to have to look at those posts. I'm going to have to look at the accusation, and let's see if these people are right. Because I'm maintaining that a bandwagon effect occurred where everybody just saw people heading in one general direction of Fire Gina Carano and just leapt on this movement. And I also maintain it has something to do with the fact that our politics in this country is so bifurcated, that there's two sides. If Ted Cruz and Donald Trump Jr. are on one side and the right-wingers are on one side, I'm going to go with this side, especially when they're already indicating that they're empathizing for marginalized groups, even if that, which they don't take this into consideration, but sometimes that empathy is, while it's good they have that empathy, they're going after the wrong person, right? Which is Gina Carano, and making a real flimsy case as to why she should be fired. So I'm going to look at first the accusation that she believes in voter fraud. Does she? Well, in November of last year, she actually posted this. We need to clean up the election process so we are not left feeling the way we do today. Put laws in place that protect us against voter fraud. Investigate every state. Film the counting. Flush out the fake votes. Require ID. Make voter fraud end in 2020. Fix the system. And that's November 5th, directly after the election. And yes, of course, she believes in voter fraud. She believed it occurred. And this is one of those accusations that is very cut and dry, very easy to show that she does believe that. But is it fireable? Is that something you want to point to as to why she should be fired? Because you want to keep in mind that of Republicans, 73% of respondents considered Trump the legitimate winner, and 24% said they are not sure. And that's a total of 97% of Republicans that believed either Trump won or they're not really sure who won. And there's a good reason why that number would be so high. It's because they're drinking from news sources, the right-wing echo chamber, that was unanimous that voter fraud occurred in a substantial enough way to swing the election. Now, I know some news commentators were sort of tapering off between November and January, so some didn't stick by this belief that voter fraud occurred substantial enough to cause Trump to win. But it was already out there, Excuse me. A lot of people already believed this. So she believed voter fraud occurred. And the reason I think it's so important to point out that 97% of Republicans either thought Trump won or they weren't sure is because the accusations being made by Donald Trump Jr., Ted Cruz, etc., is that Gina Carano got fired for being a Republican. And that's almost true whenever you look at this. If you were to point at her belief in that voter fraud occurred in a substantial enough way to swing the election, if you were to point at that and say this is a reason she should be fired, keep in mind that's 97% of Republicans that believe that something along those lines, right? And you are virtually saying Republicans are unhireable for the Mandalorian. We don't want 97% of Republicans to even be an actress or actor. They can't even read lines and pretend they're a mercenary. They're not good enough for that. Now, I understand if you're concerned about such a person legislating, that would make more sense. So this post says, breaking news, Democratic government leaders now recommends we all wear blindfolds along with masks so we can't see what's really going on. And I should note that Twitter was sort of divided as to whether this was about voter fraud, the belief in voter fraud, excuse me, or it was about masks, some mockery of masks. And I think you could interpret it as having this undertone of saying, masks are ridiculous. I don't know. You could interpret it as having that undertone because she's using masks as the example. They can wear it as blindfold. In addition to masks, you can wear blindfolds. I'm having to really break this post down just to make you understand that people were interpreting it in different ways. And given that people were wanting her to be fired both for being anti-mask and also for believing in voter fraud, I think it's important to understand what exactly this is. And this is also one of the posts that was made in November that caused Disney to reconsider having her star in her own spinoff. It was this post and the other post about voter fraud. So let me just say that there was this conspiracy theory that the Democratic the Democratic governors were in cahoots, and that there was a pause in the counting all at the same time. And in this pause, they may have changed the voter count within this tidal wave of votes that was coming in. It's a conspiracy theory. I'll share a link to why it is bullshit, but I'm not going to get into it. I think that's what this is alluding to. And as far as mocking masks, I think the whole mention of masks is because Democratic governors were in the country more forceful about serious measures against COVID, including wearing masks. So the post is like, well, in addition to that, what they want you to do is wear blindfolds, I don't know if that's necessarily a jab at masks. If you want to interpret it that way, I can't stop you, but I certainly don't see it as fireable, okay? I think to make a point real clear real quick is that people would interpret anti-mask, anti-vax, and being a COVID denier as fireable. They probably interpret it as fireable because COVID is so serious and so many are dying, which in itself is problematic, because I agree that this is a huge problem for anybody to take such stances, and there are serious ramifications for taking those stances. I think to target an actress that really, all things considered, didn't say a lot on the subject. I'm going to try to touch on every moment when she did, but all things considered, it wasn't a lot. And a lot of the posts she made about COVID weren't even like, it wasn't like, there is no such thing as COVID. She has one post that comes close to saying something like that. But even there, I'd like to talk more about that post in a moment. For now, I'm going to talk about just a few random posts related to, well, let's first talk about the riots. I'm going to get that out of the way. But my verdict for believing in voter fraud, yeah, obviously, she believed it. As far as the riots, people are saying that she was supportive of the riots. I'm going to show you some things that she liked, and this is where people got that idea. So the day before the protest that eventually became a riot, she liked something that says, "Tomorrow will be interesting. Let freedom ring." So she liked this comment. Keep in mind, Gina Carano and people in support of this protest in general did not know that something was about to go down. There were people planning for violence through Parler. Keep in mind, Parler is a social media website. That doesn't mean everybody on Parler is in cahoots that, with regard to causing a riot to occur. That'd be like people planning something on Facebook, and by virtue of planning it through Facebook, everybody on Facebook was in on it. That's not what that means. I don't want, and just because let's say a Black Lives Matter protest occurs, and we're all saying, yeah, let's go out there, protest, that's great. And then let's say it breaks out into a riot. Does that mean that I, by virtue of supporting the protest before it became a riot, that I support a riot? That's not what that means. You can't do that. So making the case that she supported a riot is very hard. But I'm going to mention a few other posts she liked. Someone said, "God bless America." This is during the protest. And another post she liked, "Pray for our Capitol Police. They have families like everyone else. Be smart," which I think is further irony that people are trying to say that she supported the riots, because Capitol Police is what stands between the people and the Capitol. And naturally, if you're having a riot, why would you say pray for the Capitol Police in that context if you believe a riot, if you believe Gina supports a riot? So all in all, there was very little effort by the Twitter, if you want to call it a Twitter mob, to try to speak or trying to refute these claims as they were being made in this tidal wave. Ultimately, Disney has said they took note of, or actually I think it was people working for Disney, they leaked it out, that they did pay attention to this whole hashtag Fire Gina Carano movement, and that was what they considered before firing her. So you can argue, you can show concern like, well, does she support the riots? You could probably, you can show concern like, just in general about Republicans, whether they do or not, because the percentage is actually very high as far as people that supported the Capitol being stormed. And that's because, let me just summarize, let me explain why that is and this is from Mediaite, and they say Trump supporters are frustrated, of course, because the president and his allies, not limited to Fox News, have spent months telling them the election was literally stolen. The pervasive but completely untrue allegation that democracy has broken down in America resulted in violence this week. Is it at all surprising that people think violence is the correct remedy to the end of democracy? And that's why the number is so high for Republicans. Keep in mind, why am I even talking about this? Because Gina Carano hasn't even said anything about the riots. So for me to say, well, she supports, it's presumptuous. And for me to just presume it and then say I want her fired because I have presumed that she's supportive of the riots, that's bullshit. You can't do that. It's like just you're putting ideas in her head. So no evidence. There's no evidence of that. What about the Parler? Daily Beast, they said that she was encouraging folks to follow her on Parler. Well, yeah, she was. She said, you can join me over at Parler. I go by Gina Joy Carano. Joy is my middle name. So she was saying, this is my name on Parler. You can come join me. For folks that don't know, Parler is a right-wing, tends to be right-wing, social media website that's thought to be like this alternative to Facebook. There's reasons to why it formed. Part of it was discussed at various censorship predilections that Facebook had, as well as Facebook stealing your data, without permission. So there's various things that led to Parler coming to be. Now, what Parler is so strict, and it takes a purist approach on free speech. So such a pure stance that a lot of hate speech comes out. I don't even just mean, because hate speech is a wide word, I mean hardcore fucking awful shit comes out on Parler that Facebook would yank. You wouldn't be able to say it. Now, Facebook also has a history of pulling down posts that don't deserve to be pulled down. So keep that in mind as well. It's not just people go there so they can be horrifically racist. It's that they don't trust Facebook because Facebook continuously pulls down posts that don't need to be pulled down. Now, hopefully they've gotten their act together. I noticed my left-wing friends would always complain about their posts, political posts that were fairly benign getting pulled down. So this was going on for a long while, but I haven't seen people complain about it recently. I think Facebook perhaps has gotten better on that. Keep in mind also that Facebook uses AI to make a lot of decisions, so that's why it would feel so arbitrary. But it led to hostility toward Facebook. And by the way, I'm not even mentioning everything, right, about social media and about the relationship of social media to censorship. I'm just giving sort of a quick summary that there were reasons to be upset. But going to Parler is not the answer. But to associate Gina Carano being on Parler with an endorsement of the hardcore hostilities, hardcore racism, hardcore awfulness that would sort of form on Parler, not form, but was allowed to be more outspoken on Parler, to associate her with that is silly. It's a sort of simplistic view of what Parler is, right? Think of how Facebook is. You have many groups. You can join many groups. If you don't like the people in that group, you leave the group. It's that simple, right? So why assume? I mean, think about how many shitty groups there are on Facebook. Can I look at like maybe a few dozen or many, 100 even Facebook groups and say, well, since all of them are awful, Facebook is therefore awful? No, you can't, because social media has so much variance. But Parler objectively has a lot of latitude for horrific people, okay? Just not going to sugarcoat that. But and Parler was used by individuals to plan the Capitol insurrection. But moving on, we've already established Gina, she shared her information about Parler, but is that bad? Is that a bad thing? People are implying it is. It would be one thing to say, well, she said this on Parler, and that's terrible. She said this on Parler, and that's terrible. That'd be different, right? But they're just saying, here's my name, and I'm on Parler. This is bad. That's not fireable. And even if you object to that because you don't want people being introduced to Parler, why? It still doesn't fall under the range of fireable, even something I would want to mention. But the fact is, Gina Carano did encourage individuals to follow her on Parler, so this claim is true. However, I'm going to put an asterisk next to it because we can't assume that just because she encouraged folks to follow her on Parler, that she endorses any particular viewpoint being expressed on Parler, including the planning of the riots. I will let you know real quick, because I haven't mentioned it yet, that Parler was founded by right-wing individuals, and that Parler does seem to attract the right wing. And part of that is because the right wing is highly engaged in the whole pro-free speech movement, for lack of a better term, and while the left wing is highly engaged in the quote-unquote cancel culture. Now, for the next video, I'm going to talk about the accusations made toward Gina Carano regarding COVID denial, regarding her being anti-mask, and regarding her being anti-vaccinations.